Thank you, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay who's in this general vicinity? You can hear me back there? Cool. My name's Cooper. I'm on the product team at Aztec Labs. This is called the Anti-Superchain Thesis. Go ahead and plug my Twitter. You can follow me at Cooper Kunz. Also, just caveat, these are obviously my own opinions. They shouldn't reflect my colleagues, Aztec Labs, Aztec the network. If I say anything stupid, it is definitely on me and not on them. So we'll kick it off. What is a superchain? I'm sure many people here are familiar with it. I'm sure it's kind of a new terminology to some others. But we'll just define the superchain. We'll start with optimism. They originally coined this as far as I know. So we'll just use their definitions for now. Superchains can be considered a network of chains that share bridging, decentralized governance, upgrades, a communication layer, and more. From their perspective, they would say a superchain is all built using the OP stack. Later in their documentation, they also define it as a decentralized blockchain platform, which consists of many chains that share security and a technology stack. Interoperability and standardization is key things that they articulate. You'll notice one of these definitions has decentralized blockchain and one of them has decentralized governance. Those are kind of intentionally different definitions. And so for my take for this presentation, I'm just going to steal Optimism's definitions and remove the fact that you have to be using their software stack. That's something that's convenient for their marketing, but you can consider this to be the same in a variety of architectures. So for the sake of my talk, a superchain is any network of chains that share bridging, decentralized governance, upgrades, a communication layer, and various pieces of their architecture. Alternatively, you can steal their other definition again and say it's a decentralized set of blockchains that share security and a tech stack. I would again say it does not have to be an OP stack. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this today. And so this presentation, contrary to its title, is not exclusively about optimism or the OP stack. It's about any L2 that specifically is trying to build products that satisfy these kind of definitions. A variety of L2s have business models that are building in this direction, and so we'll kind of talk about that. And so this is what the OP stack looks like. This is from their docs. They have a governance layer, a settlement layer, an execution layer, kind of a derivation layer. I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm sure someone from Optimism can tell me. A sequencing layer and a data availability layer. Some of these are currently implemented in the OP stack. Some of them are proposed improvements to the OP stack. Notably, you can see that within the settlement layer, Optimism is departing from optimistic rollups and proposing to integrate zero-knowledge proofs, which is a big win for anyone who's been working on zero-knowledge proofs for the past 5 or 7 years like Aztec has. And so this is what a full stack deployment of the OP stack looks like. You can take these boxes and you can look at Optimism and you can look at Coinbase and Coinbase's base L2, and they're using the same various pieces of this architecture. But the superchain would look a little bit more like this. So you could see you have n numbers of settlement layers, execution layers, and derivation layers. They would share governance and they would share sequencing and standards around data availability. But you can have different types of execution environments, finality terms, et cetera. But the key thing is that these L2 superchains share governance. They share some type of sequencing, proof aggregation, or data availability. And so this is my take on kind of how you can think of a mental model for the OP stack. There's one set of governance. There's kind of one set of standards for data availability. There's one set of sequencers usually. But you can kind of mix and match other pieces in the architecture, kind of aligned with like the modular thesis. And so this is a good mental model here. And so you can take this mental model and you can look at other L2s. Are there any other L2s that offer similar technical architectures, technical stacks, or products? You could look at ZK Sync's architecture. They call these things hyperchains, but at the end of the day, it's a bunch of L2s and L3s that share standards around data availability, sequencing, and governance that can have different various pieces of modular components throughout them. And so I would argue throughout this talk that ZK Sync's hyperchain is just one manifestation of a superchain. You could also, if you squint hard enough, you could look at Polygon's aggregation layer. Polygon's aggregation layer doesn't necessarily try to force shared sequencing on people, but it does try to force shared finality and proof aggregation on people, giving you similar properties of atomic inclusion and execution. And so you could, if you squint hard enough, Polygon's aggregation layer will probably share some type of sequencing, some type of data availability, and some type of shared governance. And so therefore, I would argue that this is, again, just a different manifestation of a superchain. You have to squint a little harder to look at Arbitrum's orbit stack. They don't actually formally share governance, and their business model is a little different. If you deploy an L3 that uses Arbitrum 1 or Nova, you actually don't have to pay rent on it, but the other ones kind of do, so it's a little bit of, you have to squint a little bit harder, but at the end of the day, these are a bunch of L2s and L3s sharing a technology stack, sharing sequencing, sharing data availability, and sharing some form of governance. And so you can see that for 3 of the most popular L2s right now, these are all multi-billion-dollar projects. They're all betting on this kind of superchain thesis, right? They're all building in a direction that uses a bunch of L2s, a bunch of L3s, shared sequencing or finality, and shared governance. And this is a spicy take. So this is my personal guess for why this is the winning business model. Building protocols is hard. You have to have a really unique product offering to get differentiation. Building protocols as a service is way easier. You can just punt that down the road and hope that they get adoption themselves. I'm going to go out and say that I think a lot of L2s don't see what they're building as public goods. They see them as profitable business endeavors, and they want to make money from them. A lot of L2's founders are coming from Web 2, and they want to license their software and make money from it. That's the way that it works. And maybe the spiciest take is that a lot of these people are trying to play infinite hopium games with their community. All it takes is just one more L3 and all of our problems will be solved. That one's going to be amazing. That one's going to get millions or billions of users, and they're going to solve the problems for us. And we will extract value for the right of them using our open source software. And so this is my personal take on why this is a popular business model for L2s today. It is fueled on hopium. And so how do superchains differentiate, right? If they're all kind of building the same model, right? They want everyone to use their tech stack, share sequencing, share governance. The current landscape, they're all differentiating on speeds, how fast you have finality and inclusion. The cost of transactions is like a huge argument in L2s. Everyone's competing to having the cheapest proving system these days. Ecosystem and developer experience is not still, on parity throughout all of them. Some support different precompiles or different features. Eventually, I do think that they will start to battle on customizability, so your ability to bring your own sequencing set or proving system on governance surface. So can you opt in or opt out of different portions of governance or reduce your governance surface where you choose to do so? And how good are they at doing, let's say, business development or paying people to be part of their ecosystem and build their ecosystem around, let's say, one of these superchains versus the other? And so my guess is that how transparent EVM blockchains differentiate, right? This is a majority of them, but you can see one axis is cost, one axis is safety or security. As soon as you're above some threshold of speed and safety and costs, let's say your average transaction is cheaper than a penny. No one really cares after it's cheaper than a cent, right? No one uses pennies anyways. And after you're above some threshold where you're no longer worried about your users' funds getting stolen, you'd be in this upper right quadrant. And I would argue that if you're above some threshold of safety and costs, you'll be completely differentiated on your brand, your ability to do business development, and have sales cycles. And I think that Polygon and Base have been wonderful examples of this. They are incredibly good at business development. And so I think right now people are debating about where they land on these axes on this grid for L2 services. Eventually everyone will be cheap enough and safe enough that you will have to differentiate on your brand, your ecosystem, and otherwise. You can also consider a trade-off space of sovereign to non-sovereign. For Aztec, having governance minimization is a priority, which we'll talk about in a second. But you can see that if you want to be as sovereign as possible, you're not reliant on any external governance systems. You should probably just build an Alt-L1. If you want to validate your proofs on Ethereum but have your own DA or something like that, build a sovereign rollup. We think that the ideal space is kind of in this Ethereum-aligned L2 sequencer space. Aztec plans on having its own sequencer network and potentially a token, but still using Ethereum for DA, proof validity, and other things. And then I would argue that no matter which of these chains you build with, your sovereignty will always be minimized, opt into some type of superchain. You'll have to, by definition, be opting into the governance of that superchain. If you did not like the governance of that superchain, you probably would not pick it, because that's one of the only things that they're differentiated on. And so, if you don't care about your sovereignty and you're happy backing on, other people's success, like superchains are probably a great option for you. If you're not a very well-known project, if you're having problems bootstrapping your own economic security or otherwise, they're probably really good options for people. But if you can differentiate, if you can build good services, if you can get people to uniquely care about you, you probably care more about your sovereignty. And so yeah, what are most superchains eventually going to be differentiated on? Right now it's cost and speed. Eventually it'll be brand and reputation and their ability to effectively bribe people or do traditional business development. How many grants you have and how good you are at giving out grants, honestly, will be the thing that wins the superchain business model. And so this is actually one of the last slides I have. I know this is a short talk, but this is actually the formal restatement of my anti-superchain thesis. I think that there will be less than 25 meaningful roll-ups or layer 2s. You'll be able to debate any of these, and this is controversial. I think that less than 25 projects will consume specifically more than 90% of Ethereum DA or relevant resources. I think that these projects, these top 25, will want to differentiate and not necessarily compromise or collaborate with others. I think meaningful projects may be okay paying rent initially, but they will not be okay paying rent forever in the term of software license, fee splits, or MEV shares. Through centralized sequencer fees, MEV share, otherwise, and they will have a strong desire to internalize value capture however possible. Again, if you're one of the top 25 projects. Meaningful projects do not want to lose sovereignty. These top 25 projects should be probably as far to the left of that spectrum as possible. They do not want to inherit additional governance or surface risks. And this is maybe one of the most key points. By the time superchains really get prioritized in engineering roadmaps, I actually think that there will be better architectures. I think there will be better solutions for those projects that are not top 25 and not able to be sovereign themselves. Specifically, I'm kind of bullish on the Ethereum shared sequencer and the Ethereum pre-confirmation calls that Justin Drake and others are talking about right now. The Ethereum shared sequencer actually gives you a lot of the strong properties including atomic inclusion, shared liquidity, fragmentation reduction, et cetera, that the superchains are promising. The difference between using the Ethereum shared sequencer is that you're Ethereum aligned rather than optimism aligned or aligned with a given L2. So I think by the time L2 teams actually prioritize this in their engineering roadmap, it'll be a slightly outdated architecture. And then I think the last point is that those that do opt into being a part of a superchain, if they are successful, will eventually opt out and leave whenever they reach critical mass or the ability to do so. At a certain point, it no longer makes sense to give someone else 15% of your sequencer fees for code that's already been open sourced for a decade or something like that. So this is the formal definition, and I think anyone could debate me on any one of these 5 points, and I'm happy to do so. And it's 100% possible this is me right now, right? Like, I'm like, people barely only want 2 to 3 EVM chains. Why do we need hundreds or thousands or millions of them, right? Like, it's possible I'm mid-curving the hell out of this. I don't know. But let's look at Aztec. Aztec is a differentiated rollup, at least in our opinion, and let's talk through some of our design decisions. Aztec has a fully programmable Aztec virtual machine, the AVM. It's brand new. No one else has anything like it. It's a decentralized layer 2. Anyone will be able to run a sequencer. Anyone will be able to run a prover. It's privacy first. What we mean is we have native account abstraction. We have a lot of fancy zero knowledge and client-side proofs. All accounts on Aztec are private smart contracts by default, and your account contracts can actually be encrypted, so no one can see your signing schemes or otherwise. We have $100 million in funding from top teams, including Andreessen, Paradigm, Variant, and a bunch of others, so we're well capitalized. Our priorities right now include privacy. That's always going to be our top priority. Safety, security, credible neutrality, and governance minimization. If these are things you care about, I hope you like Aztec and what we're building. If you don't, let us know why, and we'll fix them. Our priorities right now don't yet include being the fastest. We're not trying to be the cheapest. We are not trying to have a rent-seeking business model. We don't really know how we're going to make a bunch of money. That's not what we're prioritizing right now. What we're prioritizing is bringing privacy to Ethereum in a credibly neutral way. And we currently have no intentions to launch a superchain or a hyperchain or whatever. I would say if you look at L2s within our relative market cap, that's a pretty contrarian take. So, you know, we have to ask the question, should Aztec launch a superchain? Are we like mid-curving the hell out of this? Like, should we launch something with shared sequencing and a ZK EVM or whatever else we can dream up? Should Aztec deploy Aztec as an L3 to other L2s and provide, you know, a shared sequencer among them? Building a centralized, cheap, and fast network is honestly way, way easier than what we're trying to do today. I think we would be really, really good at it if we wanted to. And if we don't do this, are we mid-curving L2 business models? We talk about this all the time. Obviously, I don't think so. I think our strong commitment to privacy, credible neutrality, and shipping something no one's seen before should win out in the long term. But it's quite possible that we're wrong. And so, yeah, you should start building something new on Aztec today, something no one's seen. We have a really easy tutorial. Within 30 minutes, you can build private on-chain voting, deploy it to a local node. You can join our developer community, and we aim to have a testnet soon. So with that, hopefully you understand a little bit about superchains and why Aztec doesn't have one. But maybe someone will convince us that we're wrong and we should pivot. I don't know. I have 4 minutes, so I'm happy to answer questions if that's allowed. I'm getting a nod. Does anyone have any questions? Cool. Well, thank you everyone for your time. I'm actually going to be on a panel at Beyond the Base Layer after this with Mike Neuter at the Ethereum Foundation and Porter Adams at ZK Sync. So if you want to chat, head over there, and I will be hanging out there all night. Thank you all.